With the release of LP360 version 2024.2, we've added the capability to process your DJI L2 data directly in LP360 drone using our new integration with DJI Terra Cloud. This removes the need to use DJI Terra Desktop, and you can keep the workflow entirely within the LP360 environment. This video will walk you through that process and highlight some of the different steps you need to take to generate your colorized LAS point cloud. And from there, of course, you can then go into downstream workflows with an LP360 to generate product, contours, DEMs, and so forth. So we'll start in LP360 drone. So I've just opened LP360 here. I've got a blank project. I haven't loaded any data or an existing project. And we're going to start by doing our import as we normally would. So we have a couple of options here, several different sensors and several different payloads that we support, both DJI and other manufacturers, plus of course our own TrueView and Microdrones payloads. What I want to do for this demonstration is show you the full workflow. So I'm going to import the raw flights from my L2 system. If I had run it through DJI Terra on the desktop, I could work from the process data as well, but we'll go directly from the source data. So it's just a matter of adding those flights. And I've got a very short job here for very short flights, which is useful for demonstration purposes. So I've got these 4 flights here that I'm going to go ahead and import. I'm just going to do the RTK processing, real-time kinematic. LP360 drone does support PPK processing for the DJI L2 as well, and we'll have a separate video on that workflow. Relatively straightforward, but many of the same similar steps in terms of the workflow I'm going to show you today. So LP360 drone is flagging me. I'm going to do RTK processing, but it does need a reference coordinate system, of course. So I need to tell it what coordinate reference system I'm going to be using, both for my source data and also for my project data, of course. And I can set that. If I just scroll a little to the right here, I can select my coordinate reference systems here. And in this particular case, it is a geographic system. I'm going to go with NAD 83 2011 ellipsoid meters for the vertical. Fairly standard choice. Other choices are supported, of course, in there as well. That's the only setting I need to fix for the import, and I can just go ahead and click Next. This is going to create an LP360 project, of course, as it always does in my project library. So I do need to give it a name and set my project coordinate system, which will typically be the coordinate system I want my output of my deliverables to be in. So in this particular case, just give it an appropriate name. And my coordinate system here, this is at our test facility at our Huntsville office. So that is going to be Alabama East, NAD 83 Alabama East in ellipsoid meters. Let's go in here and select. Of course, support multiple different coordinates reference systems, spatial reference systems within LP360 drone. Just making sure I've got the right one here, Alabama East and ellipsoid meters. That looks good. And we'll go ahead and finish our import. Get a confirmation dialog, and we'll kick that off. So LP360 is importing each of those flights. It's pulling in the source data, all of the raw LiDAR and imagery data, all of the sort of ancillary support files that the L2 collects during its flight, and any of the associated positioning information as well. And almost finished here. You notice I do have the option, if I was going to do PPK, I can include my base observation files here. I'm just going to do RTK processing for the purposes of this demonstration. Okay, So we have imported each of our 4 flights. Each flight is going to create a set of layers in my project. My photo centers, my trajectory lines, my trajectory points, and so forth. So you can see that's my 4 flights here. I'm just going to turn off my backdrop there, just to focus on the data. And I'm now in the DJI ribbon in LP360 drone. So now I can move through the workflow. This is the standard workflow you would do for most drone payloads, but organized so it's fairly seamless as you follow along in generating our trajectories, generating our point cloud, and getting to the point where we can generate some product. So the first thing I want to do is trajectory processing. So this will bring up another dialog for me. I can process multiple flights at once, multiple trajectories at once. Generally, if I've set up everything okay and there's no issues with my raw data, there's not going to be any flags or warnings here. I can see I'm good and I'm ready to go with my sensor processing. So I'll go ahead and I'll submit that job. This is going to be submitted as a job to LP360's Job Manager, which is our batch processing tool. So it handles tracking and queuing all of your processing jobs that are running outside of LP360, whether that's for our own tools, or in this case for DJI Terra Cloud processing, or some of the other third-party integrations that we do. So it has 4 jobs. There were 4 flights, so there's going to be 4 jobs. It will submit those to Job Manager, and then that will upload the data to DJI Terra Cloud, get the processing completed, and then download the results when it's finished. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And that will bring up Job Manager for me. If you have LP360 configured, if you've provided your email address, it will send out email notifications of job starts, job completions, if there's issues with a job and so forth. So you don't have to sit here and watch the Job Manager go through and complete the task. And so we'll skip ahead. It takes for this particular job, as I said, the short flights, it takes about 8 minutes to process these. So we'll fast forward to that. So we can see that our jobs are completing here. I can actually just toggle off some of my earlier jobs that were submitted. So these are the individual jobs, as these would correspond to the flights that I submitted in Job Manager. Each goes through several steps as it is uploaded to DJI Terra Cloud, processed, and then, of course, the results downloaded. We understand that you can have large jobs. You may have multiple flights. There may, of course, always be issues, especially when you're dealing with uploading, downloading data over the internet. So Job Manager does include capabilities to, cancel jobs, retry jobs if they fail. We get some logging and status reporting. So it has a good set of tools for managing this essential batch processing that's taking place. But if everything goes as expected, if everything is working as intended, as is the case here, you will eventually complete each of your flights and they will transition into this ready state. That is, the processing has been completed. They're ready to be downloaded and added back into your LP360 project. As I mentioned earlier, if you have got LP360 configured with your email address, which of course you should, then you'll also get email notifications of these jobs as they complete. So you don't have to sit here and watch Job Manager. You'll get notified when they're ready. If you are in LP360 and there's any jobs in Job Manager ready to be completed, you will see the little Job Manager icon will toggle over to the flashing green flag. So once you have that, we can come back into Job Manager. I can just open it from here if it wasn't open. I just left it open here, of course, and I can select an individual job, or I can select multiple jobs, which of course is what I'm going to do here. And click the complete job button here, and that's going to finish the download, the transfer of the data, process data back into LP360 drone, and set us up for continuing to do our additional processing here. I also get some stats on each job, of course, as you would expect in any batch processing, the amount of time it took, start and end times, and so forth. So go ahead and complete these jobs. If you look in the lower left corner, you will see the map is being updated in the background in LP360. I could close out of here if I wanted to. I'll just wait till I see these have all completed successfully. And there we go. So now that we have completed the initial processing of the flights in DJI Terra Cloud, I want to move on to the next steps in my workflow. And the workflow here is the standard workflow you would do with LiDAR payloads, whether they're DJI, other vendors, our own TrueView or Microdrones payloads. We need to do some post-processing to set up the point cloud the way that we want it. There are two options here, and that's what this dialogue is sort of explaining to us. We can create individual flight lines, and that's the process I'm going to go through, because often we collect, in a larger area, we have transit legs, we have turns, we have areas that we have flown and collected data in that we don't want to include in our project data. And so the way we can do that is to configure the flight lines for just the area of interest. Or if, I just want to process everything, I don't need to have those flight lines, and I can just go ahead directly into the post-processing step. But we'll go through the create flight lines step so you can see how that works, because that is probably typically the way most users would want to set up their data. So go ahead and say I want to create flight lines. So let me explain what you're looking at here if you're not familiar with LP360 or you're just looking at it for the first time. So we have imported our flights, and that's what's been added into the map view here. I'll just move this out of the way a little bit. So I have each of my flights here, and for each flight, as I mentioned, I have my different trajectory lines and my photo centers from the camera. We have gotten back the LAS data from DJI Terra Cloud, and that's been added one layer for each flight. So I can look at the different flights if I want to here. This is, of course, the colorized LAS data, and I can see the different areas that I have in my project site. So if I want to create flight lines, if I decide, I don't really want all of this data in here, I've obviously got a lot of transit legs in here, and of course the turns and so forth. I can go through this create flight lines. There's two modes here. We're going to start with the auto or compute mode for the flight lines. I can provide LP360 some parameters, minimum length of a line, what my turn radius would be, maximum deviation from a straight line I'm willing to accept, and if I go ahead and use just my defaults here, these of course will be adjustable for each user and each type of flight. Go ahead and ask it to compute the flight lines. It's going to go through for each flight and compute a set of flight lines that match those parameters. So we can see that it's created these here. I do still have a couple of transit legs, but I can clean those up in the next step. Assuming I'm happy with these flight lines, and generally I would be. I don't have a cross strip here, but this is just a demonstration flight. We've got a bunch of east-west lines. I can move on to the next step. So if I want to clean up some of those extra lines, if the compute mode didn't give me exactly what I wanted, I can go ahead and manually adjust them in edit mode here. And what I do is I select each of my flights here. It's going to zoom in on that flight, show me the lines. These two lines look good for this flight. Move to the next one. I don't want this transit leg here, so I can just select that. Hit the delete key to delete it. Do I want to get rid of that flight line? Yes, I don't want any point cloud data from that transit leg. Move on to the next one. I've got another transit leg in here. Select it, hit delete key, get rid of it. And then my last flight looks good. So of course you can see there's a trade-off here between those parameters I set on the first dialog. I can try to make those optimum to get rid of most of the transit legs or turns that I don't want, or I can relax that a little bit and just go in and manually clean up the flight lines in this step if I prefer to do that. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is also the option to not have flight lines at all and just generate all of your data. So I have a little bit of information here. It tells me how many flight lines, whether I had edited or whether it was just the computed flight lines, and some additional metadata about the flight lines themselves, including where they can be found in your project tree. Okay, so this looks good. I'll zoom back out a little bit. So I've got my different flight lines here. Now I'm just showing one of the LiDAR layers, one of the LAS layers in my project here. I can, of course, we're going to merge those into a single layer later when we do the strip alignment. I can, of course, turn them all on if I want to. Sometimes that's a little bit more intuitive for people to look at. So you have those options within LP360. This, of course, is the colorized point cloud, the RGB colorized. I can look at the more traditional elevation color. I can look at intensity if I want to, and I can do that on a line-by-line basis if I want to have some variation of displays there, but we'll stick with the RGB. So back on my DJI ribbon, I've gone through my trajectory processing. I've gone through creating my flight lines. Those are the blue lines we need here. So it's simply a matter of running post-processing. So this is going to create a new set of LAS files, one for each flight line. So this is where it does the trimming and cutting to just the flight lines that we're interested in, using the specific settings we're going to walk through here in a second. If there are photos available, it is going to also trim those photos to a retained photos layer, so it'll get rid of the images from the turns and the transit legs, the same as it does with the LiDAR data. And we can also have it update the EXIF tags with the more precise positioning information. So we'll go ahead and run that. So here is all of the flights in my project. I don't have to process them all, of course, post-process them all, but I'm going to, of course. It tells me the number of flight lines, how many LAS files are input into that, how many raw LAS files are input into that. It's also going to number these flight lines. In the middle section here, I can set some processing parameters, particularly if I want to limit the LiDAR data, the point cloud data, and often a good practice is to limit that based on angle, so off nadir angle. The further away you get from nadir, you can be less accurate. You may want to clip back a little bit at the edges of those scan lines because of the scan pattern that you have. You may have just want to trim that back a little bit. Or just to have a consistent field of view of the LiDAR. 40 degrees is fairly standard, 30, 40 degrees, that's plus or minus from nadir. So we're looking at a 60 or 80 degree field of view for the LiDAR. I can open that up, as I said, I can collect to the limit of my LiDAR data. Now, of course, with the L2, you are limited by the scan pattern itself. This is a more general setting for instance, a 360-degree scanner. And I can also set a clip range if I know that I have data that's too close or too far from what I want to look at, then I can clip for that. More useful for mobile mapping situations, but you can use it for drone as well. And we're also going to update our LAS to the proper version 1.4 format and set our line numbering here. The bottom section is where I can tell LP360 what to do with the imagery. I want to retain just the photos within my flight lines for similar reasons to why I don't want the point cloud data in the turns and transit legs. I'm not interested in the imagery. I could keep it, of course. I can retain all photos if I want, but I'm going to create retained photo layers for just my flight lines. And I am going to ask it to update the EXIF tags with what we call our true pose information. So updated position and orientation information for each photo center. And we'll go ahead and run that post-processing. Now, these are quite short flights just for demonstration purposes. So obviously, if you had a real-world project where you had 10 or 20 flights, so you had much longer flight times, this post-processing step is going to take a little bit longer than it will take here. But for the purposes of demonstrating the process, you'll see it's going through each of the steps for each of these cycles. If there were any issues or errors, it will report those back, of course. But generally at this point, if you have set up everything, if you haven't had any issues with the import, your post-process or your trajectory processing, your post-processing is going to be relatively straightforward. It's just a matter of giving the time to run through the size of the data set that you have. So there we go. We've completed all 4 of our flights. They've all post-processed successfully. I can close out of here, and I can see what LP360 done is it has added a new LAS layer by default named LAS_PP for post-processed, along with the flight ID, basically date and time. And that's what I'm seeing in my map view here. Now, this is still, of course, the colorized data. So at this point, I am ready to continue with some further downstream work, but I now currently have a colorized LAS cloud in the correct LAS format, configured to the flight lines that I want to use, and post-processed to the correct parameters in terms of my clip angle, clip range, and so forth, along with updated EXIF tags on the imagery and retained photo layers for any imagery work, typically an orthophoto generation that I want to do. I'm going to do one more step here just to show you the completeness of it, but we'll not move too much further downstream because, of course, at that point, you're really talking about point cloud and imagery work that's independent of the sensor type. But if I do come back to my DJI ribbon here, I can see, so here's my post-processing. We basically went left to right across here. The next generally major step that's done is strip alignment. That's basically doing strip matching. I can select my 4 post-processed layers here. And one thing that this will do in addition to doing the strip alignment or strip adjustment, that's getting rid of any systematic bore sight errors, getting rid of any dynamic errors in my positioning and orientation information that are resulting in offsets between my flight lines. Basically doing my interior orientation of my LiDAR data, making sure everything is rigorous and rigid within the calibration parameters of the sensor, and then the strips match edge to edge. It will also create a single layout for me, which is what I want for further downstream work. So we'll just call this LAS PP SA for strip adjusted. And I'll go ahead and submit that strip align job. So that will run through Job Manager. At that point, I'll have a single working layer that I can use for my downstream work from that point. So in summary, that's essentially the workflow that you go through when you want to process your DJI L2 data in LP360 drone, and you're going to use DJI Terra Cloud. You're not going to use Terra Desktop. You want to run through the integrated workflow within LP360. You start from importing your flights as you typically would do with any payload. And then we have a new DJI ribbon here that will open automatically and just walks you through the process. And hopefully you saw a very straightforward process, something that's fairly straightforward to learn and pick up with, and that you'd be very familiar with if you've done any sort of payload processing in LP360. Do the trajectory processing, which will upload the data to DJI Terra Cloud. Create flight lines, assuming we want to use flight lines in our data set, and then do some post-processing to do the set up the LAS data for how I want it configured for the particular job. Now you can rerun the post-processing. I didn't mention this here. If I decided I need to adjust my clip angle or my clip range, or maybe I needed to actually retain all of my photos, I can come back and rerun this again. One of the nice advantages of having this integrated workflow. That's a brief overview of processing your DJI L2 data in LP360 drone with our new DJI Terra Cloud integration.